What's up guys, in today's video we're going to talk about if you can make a living with forex trading like that. Now it's very hard to answer that question directly because that depends on every individual separately. Let's say supposedly you're an individual A who needs roughly $3,000 a month for you to make a living off of it, or you are an individual B who needs, for example, 10,000 or 10K. The first example is we have to first off understand how much money you're making every month regarding your risk that you're willing to take every month, okay? Because to make more money it means you need to take more risk. So I'll assume that you're roughly taking 5% a month, okay? Now, it's not like 5% a month for 40, 50 years. Now, there's a lot of nuances when it comes to talking about this 5% because I'm not talking about compounding 5% a month for 50 years and then, turning $100 into $1 trillion because that would have been that example. I'm talking about doing roughly 60% a year. So if you're doing 5% a month for 12 months straight, that's 60% a year. Now, the second year, the conversation changes, the risk management changes, etc., stuff like that. So I'm just going to keep the first level, right? That's 60% a year, 5% a month. How much would you have to make in order for you to generate the $3,000 that you need? So you will need a capital of $60,000, okay, which is 3K, which is 5%, okay? That's more or less what you have to understand, but that's only one of the things. Actually, you need a lot more than that because what trading is, you have to treat trading like a business. It's not like a fixed income. It's not like a paycheck. You cannot treat trading like a work or like a job because it's not a job, okay? That's why ideally, if you need $3,000 a month to survive, you need to make more from the market so that way you have breathing room, okay, cash flow and things like that, just in case you don't perform 5% the next month, because you cannot guarantee that you're going to make 5% every month. No matter how good you are, sometimes the market is just hard in that month or in that period or etc., stuff like that. That's why you cannot treat it like a job because it's not a job, okay? Taking that into consideration, I would say that instead of having 60,000, you would have to have 100,000 because now the 5% is 6,000, which is a lot better than the initial 3,000. Now you got 3,000 as your breathing room. Okay, BR stands for breathing room. Like I said, that means you have cash flow, which is what you need, worst case scenario, because you cannot control what will be the outcomes because it's not a job. The more you're generating per month, or whether it's through making a higher percentage rate or having more money, and then the 5% of that money is giving you a lot more than what you need, and then you just compound that. You invest that in treasury bonds or have a lot of liquidity because you have to have liquidity. That's more or less what you have to understand and what you have to do in order for you to make a quote-unquote living out of the market, because making a living out of the market alone is really hard. You need to have a lot of money. Like I said, if you only want to make a living with Forex alone, I would advise you to have a lot more than just 60,000. You need to have 500K, almost $1 million sometimes. That depends a lot, like again, on your monthly expenses, etc., stuff like that. And also, there's no liquidity in this market, and there's a lot of nuances. That's why, like I said, what I prefer to do in foreign exchange market is use Forex as an extra, okay, extra monthly income. Because that way you don't have to quit your job, or you don't have to stop doing what's giving you a more stable, right, solid income. And that way you can sustain yourself. And then the money that you make extra from the market, you can keep it, or you can compound it for the long term, or you can reinvest in other things. But that way you're having more and more and more time and more money to do whatever you want to do in the future. So that way you have more breathing room again. Now the person B, which we talked about in the beginning of this video, would be roughly the exact same thing. If you're the person B, but you need 10,000, say you have a family or you're in a different situation, you need a lot more, all right? Like I said, 5% a month, that would be like what, 200K, right? So 200K, if you make 5% a month, 5% a month, it's 10,000, okay? But again, if you make 10,000, you're still at your limit. So you need a lot more than that. You need, I don't know, maybe 400K, for example, for you to generate 20,000. That way you can generate 20,000. So that way you can use 10,000, for example. All right. That's one strategy. And even with this, I would still not advise somebody just stop everything just to do this, because still you cannot guarantee whether you're going to make 5% every month. You can make 5% one month, and you can do 7% the other month, and you can do 1% the other month, and then 0% the other month, because that's the normal webs and flows of the market. It's variable income, so you cannot count on the money, especially if you don't have a lot of cash initially. If you have a lot of money, if you have a lot of margin, then that's a whole different story. I'm talking about if you have like millions of dollars and have a huge portfolio with stocks, with treasury bonds, with real estate, with a whole bunch of things, and that's a whole different situation, because that way you're not relying on this money so much. But if you're somebody who's starting right now, who's still building your portfolio, you're still in that saving up phase, etc., to grow that portfolio, you cannot rely on this thing. Otherwise, it's not going to work for you. If you generate, for example, 5,000 and you have that money, but then you take that money that month and then you generate that again, and then you take that money again and then you generate it again, and then you take all of it again, you're actually increasing your drawdown of your strategy, and you're not giving yourself space to grow. In the beginning, that's what you need the most, so that later on you have space to take some of that money out. And if you do that, you run the risk of blowing up your account, or just pretty much trading, because your drawdown is increasing significantly every month, supposedly, right? That depends on what you're doing, like how are you managing your risk, but supposedly saying your drawdown is increasing every month. So you have the market here, you're making 5K, then you're making 5K again, and then you're making 5K again. Your drawdowns here is increasing. At some point, the frequency drawdown, in which I talked about in one of the other videos, which is going to be the blowing up of your account, will come, and you will not have enough profits to cover up for that loss. So essentially, you can either be negative, or you can even close at break even, right? You can lose 100% and then you make 100%. So that means you're at break even, right? Because there's no point for you to make $60,000 a year with the market, and then you have to withdraw the money, and then you lose 60,000. Okay, so you lose your 60,000 initially, and you made 60,000 from the market. So although you made money, you haven't kept your initial capital. So you just traded one thing for the other thing. So in the end, you at break even. So that means you have $0.000 of profit. That's why making a living with Forex alone, unless you have a lot of cash, a lot of structure, it's very unlikely. So I hate to break it down to you guys, but like I said, I want to make this channel more realistic and make sure that you have a lot of streams of income and treat Forex as an extra income rather than the main thing, unless you have, like I said, millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars and a whole bunch of investments and stuff like that, which is not the case for most people, unfortunately. So just keep that in mind. Anyways, guys, I hope you liked the video. Okay, if you liked it, please subscribe for more. We're studying the market pretty much every day, and I'm here to teach you everything I know when it comes to Forex. I'm not the guy that knows everything. Okay, I'm just sharing my personal experience with over 6 years of market. And if you like this, stay tuned for more. See you in the next one. Bye.